So much, everyone, for signing up and attending to today's webinar. Like I said, it's the first one for this year, and we're looking at doing a bit of a series of webinars in the coming months, and they're through our Australia Government Future Drought Fund Farm Business Resilience Program. So we're looking forward to, finding some more guest speakers and some topics. And, we're always happy for people to feed through ideas and topics for webinars as well. And we've got the chat function. If you're not familiar with these sorts of webinar and team online meetings, is that there is a little chat function usually at the top, and use that to let us know where you're dialing in from today. It's always nice to know, like Kerry said, she's coming all the way from Queensland, and let us know where you are coming from. And if you've got any questions throughout the presentation, just pop them in that chat function and we'll get to them at the end of Kim's presentation. But sometimes your question might get answered as Kim goes through. So just pop them in that chat box. Mary will monitor them, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll sort of collate them and be able to feed them back to Kim. The webinar is going to be recorded, and Mary's already got that going now. So we'll be able to send the recording out to everyone who's online today and anyone who sort of didn't make it. But probably best to turn your cameras off and mute yourself, just so we don't have that sort of background noise or any sort of embarrassing video moments that we have all done over the last 2 years. But other than that, I think we can hook into it. And so first up, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the ACT and the region, which is where myself and Anna and Mary are, and pay our respect to their connection to country and community, and for their culture, and to the elders past, present and future. We're always learning from them, and love to continue to learn from our elders around this ACT region. So I think just like, you're not here to listen to me, so but again, just remember there's that chat function. Put your questions in there, let us know where you're dialing in from. But I think really, unless Kim, you've got any questions for us, I think we're good to go. If you want to introduce yourself and then start your presentation. I'll probably turn my camera off, but yeah, I can quickly turn it on if you've got any questions or anything goes wrong. Over to you, Kim.
Thank you so much, and thank you again for the opportunity to share with everyone today on the topic of rainfall use sufficiency. It's a bit of a favourite topic of mine and something I've been exploring for many, many years. I can't even remember how many, but I guess when you work in agriculture, it's front and centre. Most of my career in agriculture has been dealing with climate extremes of one variation or another. It's very rare that we have an average year, isn't it? So I'm going to just share my screen with you, and I can tell you a bit more about myself when I get there. Just bear with me. Here we go. You should be able to see my PowerPoint presentation now.
That looks good.
Cool. All good? That's great.
Yes,
always
thank you.
a relief to know that that's working. Okay.
Yeah.
So the thing about rainfall is it's free, and today I want us to explore how we can make the best use of such a precious free resource that we know drives farm profitability. We're going to explore some key concepts around soil health and its importance with rainfall use sufficiency, but I first want to really acknowledge that here in Australia, regardless of where we live, most of us in the last few years have been impacted by historic droughts, fires and floods, and sometimes all three. The thing is that the circumstances that contribute to these extreme events, they're really complex. But what we're going to do here is focus on the things we can control. I think, extreme weather events are going to continue to happen. And what we can do is not make them worse. So look at ways we can not make those things worse when they do happen, and how we can build our resilience to climate variability and climate extremes. So today we're really going to be delving into what are the things we can control. As I was introduced, my business is called Reinventing Agriculture, and I guess I came across that name because I realised that a lot of my career in agriculture, I've been working in ag for about 30 years, which is a bit scary to think about. But a lot of that's been working and helping people adjust to changes, whether that be climate extremes, business pressures, whatever it might be, in various roles and wearing different hats. But it all comes back to this theme of resilience, and I'm pretty passionate about that. We bring a very whole systems view and help sort of work within the business to, look at how we can steward the soil, the mindset and the people aspects of the business, and also the financial aspects of business management to create resilient, profitable businesses. And dealing with climate variability is a really key part of that. So that will be coming through today, where we'll be focusing. But you'll notice I'll often bring it back to the whole, because for me, everything is just so connected. I want us to focus on this really concept today of the circle of influence and circle of concern. It's very, very helpful when we're talking about things that relate to weather or climate. It keeps us proactively focused on what we can do rather than all the things we can't do. Because when we focus on just the things we can't control, in our circle of concern are the things that concern us, but we have very little power to influence them, such as the amount of rain we get. We actually shrink our circle of influence because we are focusing on something that we can't control. We can't control how much rain falls when that storm comes through or the change blows across, So we want to expand our circle of influence. So today we're going to focus on how well we use the rain that falls. And when we focus on our circle of influence, it actually gets bigger because we're spending time and energy there. So that's the whole point of today. Let's look at what we can do, not all the things we can't do. And it's, again, how much rain did you get or did we get? It's a pretty common question in rural communities, isn't it? I'm asking that question of my clients regularly. It's because conversation, how much rain did you get in that change? Every single week, probably. If it's rained, we're asking that question. But, today we're going to look at what is rainfall use efficiency. We're going to look at how we can measure it and how we can improve it. And those aspects of rainfall, we don't talk a lot about. I don't hear anyone saying how much of that rain soaked in or how much of that rain did you keep on your property. And so hopefully we can change those conversations and start to expand on that a little bit, perhaps after today. One of the things that inspired me on this journey of rainfall use efficiency, I was teaching whole farm planning for a few years and went down a bit of a rabbit hole on rainfall use efficiency because it had also been a key component of property planning courses up here where I'm based in northern New South Wales. I live near Inverell in northern New South Wales. It had been a key part of property planning programs in this area for a long time, and other people had also had that passion delivering those workshops. And there was some work done up here in northern New South Wales around, I think it probably stretched, I'm not sure exactly geographically, but I'm imagining from the northern tablelands out to the sort of western areas of New South Wales, probably that, mid-western area. And then there was another study down around Tamworth, but there was 1,700 farms they studied rainfall use efficiency on and found that there was, huge variation from between 6% of the rain that was falling being converted to agricultural production, and in some cases 70%, but the average was only 21%, which is showing there's a fairly good level of room for improvement. And this study was probably done, I think it was done in around the 2000s. There's a reference at the bottom of the slide if you want to read a bit more about it. And it was done by Bruce Gardner and Warwick Brown, who were doing a lot of property planning in the Farming for the Future program back in those days. I haven't seen much work being done on that since, and I'd love to see more of it. But, it's an interesting sort of statistics that gives us hope that there's more we can do here to unlock potential and really look at how we can drive profit and resilience in our businesses. This also came from some of the work that they did. They took these stats from an ABARE, some ABARE data, looking at different types of farming systems and the percentage of the rain that was being actually used. So that's also showing around about that 20% mark. And I think, I know that there's always going to be losses of rainfall through runoff and evaporation. It's inevitable, but I think we've still got a bit of a way to go as far as harnessing it in agricultural production. It says to me there's a bit of room for improvement and some potential we can unlock, isn't there? So what is it? Rainfall use efficiency, I like to define it as the amount of rainfall converted to farm profit. Now, in the stats we just looked at in the previous slides, they use a lot more complicated measures to look at rainfall efficiency than this. However, I'm focusing today on how can we do this on farm with data we have that's simple to do. And for me, it's to look at your farm profitability or your gross margin per millimetre of rain or per 100 millimetre of rain. And if you can do that, you can monitor your trends over time to see how effectively you're using this free resource. We know rainfall drives our income. We know how important it is. But yeah, and I think traditionally we've focused a lot on the rainfall, like the production side of rainfall use efficiency, to try and, get yield per millimetre of rain. But sometimes when we just focus there, we miss the fact that that is being driven by lots of input costs, and they can be taking away from farm profitability. My focus is always on what money the farmer has in their pocket, not how much is going to, the inputs and the cost of production. So profitability is really a good place to start to focus in your own business. And it's not difficult to do if you're tracking some basic data like the profitability and the gross margins. Okay, so that's how I like to define it and how I'd encourage you to think about it. But when we think about the water cycle, like if we're looking at rainfall use efficiency, we need to think about what happens to water after it rains on our properties and on our landscapes. In here, this is where all the places water goes after it rains in this diagram. And you think, we're going to have water continually moving through the system. It's continually moving around the planet in forms like gas, liquids and solids. It's continually in motion. So if we're going to make the most of this water, we've really got to get it into our soil and, have soils that absorb water. We've got vegetation that are a key part of the water cycle being functional and healthy. They're transpiring. We've got evaporation happening, runoff, and also deep drainage of water into the soil. They're all the components that are affecting our rainfall use efficiency. Okay, so let's think about what makes the water cycle effective. When we've got an effective water cycle, we actually don't have huge amounts of erosion because the water's going into the soil. When we've got erosion, we've got a lot of runoff. So, runoff's part of a water cycle, but very rapid runoff that's taking soil with it is not an effective water cycle. In effective water cycles, the water gets in and the soil can hold a lot of water. When, creeks start to flow and dams start to fill and the water cycle's healing and getting more effective, it might not be in a rush of water, but it will flow more gradually, more perennially, because the water's just gradually being released out of the sponge in the soil, So in that way, we can slow down flooding and have reduced incidence of flooding, just because our soils are holding more to start with. When our water cycle's not that effective, we see a lot of this. We see water just lying on bare ground, not going in. We see water and soil runoff and taking soil with it. We have this system where the soils that have lost their structure and can't get water in and can't hold it there, means that we have erosion's the number one thing, but, also some other signs like I've got in these photos here. Like this is one on just looking on two different ways of managing grazing where the water's gone in a shower of rain. It was actually raining when I took this photo to see, what's happening with the water that's falling. Is it soaking in or is it not? But this is one instance that I had, a photo I've had for a few years in my local community in Varel, but this is a site we see commonly across Australia. So, we had 100 mils of rain in a rain event a few years ago, and everyone was excited to see the water in the river. All I could see was all the soil in that river. Like, when our water cycle's struggling, there's going to be a lot of sediment in when we get floodwaters, and we're going to have dirty water. A healthy water cycle, the water can be filtered and be clean running into the river. And even in a be a lot less sediment, there might always be, times where something like that happens, but the whole point is to minimise the sediment by improving our water cycle. The other thing we see is really not happy water like this. I took this photo in March when I was down at Wentworth. It was the first time I've ever been driven by a boat into a farm visit over floodwaters, and look at the water or the algal blooms. That's a good indication that there's been a lot of nutrients that come from fertilizers and other things washed into that water that are creating algal blooms and making it very difficult for the aquatic life and marine life in our waterways. So These are also signs that our water cycle's struggling, okay? Where you guys are in Canberra, this is a really interesting statistic to give you the context, in your area about how much rain you get when it falls during the year. Its distribution's reasonably even for you, but evaporation, like everywhere, is highest in summer. And every time I've graphed this for a different community, I find that evaporation is always much greater than rainfall. Yet plants still grow, things still happen. The key is, how do we minimise that evaporation and make the most of this rainfall down here? As you can see, the rainfall is incredibly precious, and it's the part that we can control is actually how much evaporates. We can, to a point, minimise that and manage that. We can't always control the rainfall. So it's a really nice way to get a bit of a context for yourselves. So back to the water cycle and what we can do within our circle of influence to improve our capture of rainfall. Okay, there's a few key areas I want you to consider today. First one is increasing water infiltration. What are we going to do to help get water into the soil? And part of that we'll go through in a second. We can also improve the water holding capacity in our soil, and I've got some pretty interesting information on that for you coming up as well. We can decrease evaporation, and we can encourage deeper rooting plants to be able to use more of the moisture in our soil rather than having it be lost through to deep drainage. So to do this, there's a few key practices, and they kind of across all of these four ways we can, the things we can do within our control. These few key areas can help with that. The first one is keeping our soil covered. That's just the most important thing we can do, because if we've got ground cover, those plants actually create channels through their root systems for water to get into our soil. We often get way better water infiltration when we've got living ground cover on the soil. It's really important. It also protects your soil from raindrop impact, because if soil's bare and raindrops are hitting with intensity, they're actually destroying those soil aggregates, and the soil powders up and seals off and water can't get in. So it's really important to have ground cover. Ground cover also slows evaporation and, wind speed, and giving a cover on the soil to protect that evaporation. So it's got most of these aspects hit most of these different components within our control. It also, if we've got a good ground cover and we're encouraging and manage it well, we'll have deeper root systems as well. We can't have deeper root systems without ground cover. Living ground cover is always better any ground cover is better than none, but living ground cover makes a huge difference because it's part of that transpiration cycle. It's looking after the soil health as well. So it's improving everything, and healthy soils can absorb more water and hold more water. In increasing plant diversity, however we're grazing or cropping, whatever our land use is, the more plant diversity that we have, the more we've got the ability to respond to rain when it falls, because we've got a variation of plants that can take advantage of that. And that's part of actually being able to use the rain, is having things growing when it rains. So increasing plant diversity is really helpful with that. And how we manage our grazing animals. I'm going to touch on that a little bit in a minute, but the way we manage our grazing has a huge impact on the water cycle, because it's impacting the plant growth, it's impacting soil health, and it's impacting infiltration, evaporation, everything, whether how we manage those landscape. Also, we're reducing tillage, because tillage will help. It's been part of the practices that have reduced our soil organic matter, which has reduced our soil water holding capacity. And it's also exposing bare soil to rain, which creates other challenges, as I said, with soil aggregates losing their ability to stay together. Windbreaks are great in our environments because they'll slow evaporation and wind speed, help keep more water in the soil. And just as the biggest thing I think we can all do is start to manage for soil organic matter and soil health, because it's pivotal in improving water use efficiency and rainfall use efficiency. They go hand in hand together. It's really interesting when we start to think about these practices and processes. A lot of people who start to go on a journey of improving the water cycle often notice that their dams don't fill so quickly, and things, they don't see the creek come up as quickly. And at first, if they're relying on dam water, they can start to worry. But over time, what they begin to see, if they can stick with it, is it's a bit of a paradox, really, because while those things take a bit longer, once the water cycle's working properly, they're filling more gently, and they're filling just through that deep percolation of water through the system, as it always has done in nature, in healthy systems, rather than a rush of dirty water in a storm, filling their dams with mud, or sometimes I've seen cow manure in droughts filling dams with manure, because it's all run off really quickly. Rather than having that, the water's clean and it's just percolating in gently. And so that's, it's a bit of a paradox that it will reduce water. It will only do that in that healing phase, and then you start to see everything work better. So yeah, it's working with the whole system and managing for soil health. It's really, really powerful. It's also really interesting when we think about soils. This data on where most water is held on the planet is that more water is held in soils than in rivers, which is fascinating, isn't it? Because we don't see it. So we stop to think and look at our soil in terms of a huge, big water tank or water reservoir, but it is more significant on the planet than rivers are. So it really is a great place to really start to influence the factors within our control with rainfall use efficiency. And I guess, if we're looking at rainfall use efficiency, and I've covered what it is as far as how you can work it out profitability-wise and a few ways to look at it, but how else can you do it? We've looked at the financial aspect, but we can also look at water infiltration rate. This is a simple test that we can all do with very basic equipment to give us a great thing to monitor over time to see us, as our soil health improves, how much more water we can get into our soils when it rains. We can also monitor and look at our soil physical health, and I'll touch on that briefly today. As I said, we can start to track our financials in terms of per millimetre of rain or per 100 millimetres of rain, some of the key financial indicators. And we can also look at our own well-being, because when things aren't going well with water cycles and rainfall use efficiency, we end up with a business that is stressed financially and stressed people. And that can be, really difficult to get ahead when our own mindset's struggling or we're stressed. We don't make great decisions then. So there's a really holistic look at what I'm going to cover in the rest of this session is how do we test water infiltration rate and a few key things on the soil physical note that you can take away to start thinking about in your enterprises and landscapes. So infiltration test and a soil infiltration test is I love doing these. I've been doing them for many years. It always gives you if you do one soil monitoring practice, I reckon this gives you a really good insight holistically into everything, because a healthy soil will absorb water. If water's not going in, you've got some work to do. And it also helps you learn about the characteristics of your soil and how it behaves when it's wet. It's really, really interesting. So the way we've been doing this for a few years is just using a piece of downpipe. My piece of downpipe is about 10 centimetres, 100 mils wide. I wouldn't go any smaller than that. 15's great. And we hit that into the ground. I usually put a board over the top and have a hammer and hammer it into the ground about 10 centimetres deep. That can be very difficult in dry, hard soils. Trust me, a few good workouts during this test. It's always a great sign if that goes in well, but don't lose hope if it's hard. It does happen. Once we have that there, I usually cover the soil in the tube with a plastic bag, and then I pour in the equivalent of an inch of water, 25 mils. So you can either measure that with a ruler and see where your inch is. For me, because I do it regularly, I know that in a 10 centimetre diameter pipe, 200 mils of water is equivalent to an inch of rain. So I just measure in my jug because I'm doing it all the time. But you can work that out, or you could just measure with the ruler. We pour in 1 inch and we see how long it takes to soak in. Then we do a second and a third separately, all going well. Often we don't get 1 inch of rain in, and sometimes we get all 3 in really quickly. It really varies, and on some soils I monitor regularly, that can change. So, sometimes we get great results, sometimes we don't, and we can stop and think what's happening in the soil at this time, because, ideally you do this at the same time of year, but you're rarely going to do it with the exact same soil moisture. So, it's just a great thing to do once a year. Pick a time of year that you want to look at your soils and go and do a soil water infiltration test. If if the water's not going in and it's really, really slow, what you can do is just use your ruler and measure how much on the ruler's gone in 6 minutes. And then in those 6 minutes, you can multiply that by 10 to have an infiltration rate in millimetres per hour. Because what we're looking to have is how much water's going in an amount of time. So it's often converted to millimetres per hour. And then you can sort of start to see, I love to see 1 inch of rain go in with under 2 minutes is amazing. Once it's 12 minutes for an inch of rain, things are getting pretty sad, you know. But this, when you convert it to millimetres an hour, there's some scoring here that you can start to look at. And I can give you a copy of these slides, or you can check out the references I've got on the slides if you want to go a bit deeper into these areas. If you're going to go and do this, this is how you can score your soil and monitor the trend over time, because if that's going up over time, your rainfall use efficiency is going to go up too, you know, because your soil health is improving. When we're in the field, we see all sorts of things to read.
Sorry, Kim, just back to your other slide there with your table.
Yep.
Just with your moderate in the middle. Is that 25 to 100 or 25 to 10?
Yeah, 25 to 100. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. No, that's all good. Thank you.
Cool. I didn't even question it because I just took it out of the book. But yes, it was 25 to 100. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's
Thank you. No problem.
Thanks for calling that up, picking that up. So when you do this in the field, this bare soil was in the thick of the 2019 drought, and that soil swelled up and came up the infiltration tube, which was not a good sign for when it did rain, because what that told us is when it rains on this paddock, what's going to happen? All that soil is probably going to wash away. It's got nothing holding it together. And it was incredible to see that, you know, so much stress on the system through that period of time climatically, but that soil was not resilient to that. Sometimes we can have good ground cover, but in really wet conditions, that water infiltration rate can slow significantly. But I still say to people it's good to do it when it's really dry and wet, because you start to see how your soil is behaving in those conditions. And over time, as you rebuild the health in your soil, it's going to handle those extremes better. And so it's more important to do the test than it is to go, oh, it's too wet or it's too dry, and just learn and observe over time. It really gives you a great insight into, you know, the capacity for you to improve rainfall use efficiency. Because the number one thing, if we're going to improve it, first we've got to get the water in the soil, not having it run off and evaporate. This is something that I guess what drives my passion significantly is watching what's happening on our landscape that we've been stewarding for 18 years. This after 5 record-breaking drought all in 1 year. And when it finally rained, we were burnt out in February, didn't rain much all year. We got this rain in about November, and I was out in the rain taking photos, because while we thought the fire and the drought had pretty much set back our soil restoration journey, what we could see was on our side of the fence, the water was soaking in, even after all of that. That's the beauty of the resilience you can build. And we hadn't had perfect conditions to do this in, but over the 15 years that the changes had been happening, our soil could now absorb water. Where beyond the fence, it's not a river or a lake, it's actually a grazing paddock. Just the same, the water's just not going in at all. And so it just drives my passion when I see what can happen when we change how we do things and how much more water we can capture through some simple changes and a commitment to implementing them over time. So soil health, where we're going now, because it is what drove that picture and what drives a lot of our rainfall use efficiency. It's all hidden under our soil and under our feet. And I think that what we have to start to do if we want to talk rainfall use efficiency is move away from just looking at mineral health and soil chemical results on soil tests. They're still useful, but don't look at them in isolation. We need to start to look at how the soil physical health is going and how its biological health is going. And all of those 3 components of soil health are all kind of the glue that holds them all together is soil organic matter. And it also drives rainfall use efficiency. So it's really, really important, I guess, to think about how can we improve our soil health, because that's going to drive rainfall use efficiency. A healthy soil, a lot of us haven't seen a really healthy soil if we've been in agriculture. predominantly, unless we garden. Gardeners know healthy soil because it's a smaller land area. They're able to get there quicker, but the same processes apply on all scales to what makes a healthy soil. A healthy soil can hold on to and release soil nutrients. It will hold on to and gradually release water. It is that great reservoir that we've forgotten that's under our feet. It'll have great structure, be full of life. And in doing all those things, it's also protecting in the system against pests and diseases. It decomposes, residues, but also detoxifies any a small amount of chemical a healthy soil can deal with and detoxify. When it gets too much, the system collapses. It also is huge in helping us deal with the changeable climates and helping build our resilience. So, it's all coming back to that. And, it's naturally going to be full of life like earthworms and all sorts of things we can and can't see. And in a healthy soil and an ideal component of a soil, we'd have around 5% organic matter. I don't like to ever limit it, but, we'd say we'd aim for that to be pretty good. A healthy soil would also have 25% air, which is basically space. Now, we don't see that a lot in our soils. And, that would be able to hold, I guess that depends on the conditions, but be capable of being 25% water at time and still having airspace and that mineral component. But what we more commonly see is compaction. This is a pretty extreme photo of soil compaction, but I think the number one issue in agriculture on all levels, whether it be nutrition, health and resilience of crops and animals, soil compaction is a huge one. And we cannot, change that without changing our management. And it's also a huge part of rainfall use efficiency because the water's got to sort of get into a soil that's really hard and it's not always happening. We can't buy soil structure in our bag. That's where, there's no silver bullet. There's no answer that's just going to magically fix the soil compaction that we've got in our soils. It really comes down to a whole system of management and an approach and understanding what makes soils healthy. Okay, it's a whole system issue. But where I think we can focus and pull a lever with soils, everything with your soil, including the compaction that's helping stop the water get in, is by starting to understand the purpose and function of soil organic matter and carbon in our soil. It's a bit of a buzzword at the moment, but forgetting all of that, it's going to reward you financially regardless if you can store water. And 1% of carbon holds 144 litres per hectare of water, which is massive, isn't it? Christine Jones, there's a little link here as a reference if you want to read more. She's done a few calculations around this. And in effect, basically, I've got some figures in my notes, just bear with me. I had it for, in 1 square metre of soil, that 1%'s almost 2 buckets of extra water. It's huge, isn't it, when you start to think of it in terms of that. And it really is the key, I think, to unlocking rainfall use efficiency and climate resilience, but it just benefits everything from there and profitability as well. These figures were interesting as well on, that soil carbon as a sponge and the different types of soil, because Christine's figures were kind of an average soil and different soils have, they behave differently. If you've got a really sandy granite soil, the benefit of that soil carbon is even greater than it is in a high clay soil because clay will hold water much more than, sandy soils do not. They're very well drained. They don't hang on to a lot of water. But your soil carbon is a really huge lever to pull in any system, but most particularly those lighter soils like what we have here is a granite, sandy granite with a very low water holding capacity. And that soil organic matter just is so beneficial if you start to think of how much your 1% of soil carbon can increase your water holding capacity, but between 10 and 30% in your soil. So that alone is going to make a huge difference to rainfall use efficiency. And beyond that, the organic matter is this life force in the soil. As you see, it's a huge reservoir for water. It also stores plant nutrients, and it also is like an insulative blanket in the soil that helps regulate soil temperatures. When I monitor soils, I see the soil temperatures when there's not much organic matter going up and down with the day temperature. But when we've got a lot of organic matter, those soil temperatures stay more moderated, which is much better environment for the soil biology to thrive in, who are part of restoring your soil carbon. So it's an interesting one. And, you know, as Christine Jones has got some work on the loss. She estimates we've lost between 50 and 80% of the organic carbon in our soils since European settlement. So, you know, and she's got, if you haven't read any of her work and this is interesting to you, if you Google Amazing Carbon, you can read a lot of her papers on these topics and how that soil carbon and water and everything else goes together. But it really is a huge benefit for profitability as well, isn't it? If we can drive more water storage, we're going to have more production. This study was done in the United States, and they showed how soil organic matter was a more important driver of profitability than yields were, which I think kind of is contributed to greatly by the fact that when we restore our soil organic matter, we improve our rainfall use efficiency, and rainfall is free. So if we're improving the way we use free resources, we are improving profitability. And we can't actually be maximising profitability if we're not maximising the use of the free inputs in the system that nature provides us. So something to think about there. But it's all great to talk about soil organic matter. What can we do? And, you know, I think one of the things is just to start to understand the carbon cycle at work. This, you know, how does this function? How do we restore it? And what can we do? It's a lot, but to simplify it in really key points is there's two ways we get soil carbon back. There's one called the decomposition cycle, which is where the residues on the surface are decomposed and they over time go back into the soil. Or there's a liquid carbon pathway. And Christine Jones has a lot of work on the liquid carbon pathway on her website that I recommend reading if you're interested to learn more. The liquid carbon pathways where the photosynthesizing plants are taking sunlight through photosynthesis, creating sugars that get fed down through the roots to the soil biology, and that liquid carbon becomes soil carbon. When studies have been done, it's actually almost six times quicker to restore carbon through the liquid carbon pathway than it is through the decomposition, because when residues on the surface are decomposing, some of them are lost through oxidation, but when we get healthy plants in a healthy soil and they're photosynthesizing, those exudates can create a much more quicker form of carbon and more stable as well. So it's really about growing plants. If we can't restore our soil health without growing plants, and it's the quickest way to bring it back and capture more rainfall is to grow more plants. When we're grazing, how we graze helps us grow more plants. This is some data showing that, you know, if we overgraze till we've got nothing left, that we lose the plant roots. We also aren't going to effectively use the rainfall, because imagine how much less water that plant can take in with less root system. It's not getting the free solar energy that drives the soil carbon to store more water in the soil either. So the key is to be really managing our grazing so that we leave solar panels on our plants in forms of leaves to capture solar energy and feed down to create carbon, but also just, you know, they're quicker to respond when it rains as well. So it sort of goes across all areas, doesn't it? Grazing management is your biggest tool for improving all of this in your system. This data shows what happened through water infiltration rate by managed grazing and more planned grazing practices rather than just continually set stocking. Water infiltration rates went up significantly. So you can see if we're going to improve rainfall use efficiency, managing our grazing is a huge tool that we have. Also starting to think about soil health, you know, what can we look at in general terms, because the healthier our soil gets, which the carbon is going to drive, but also so many decisions are impacting it. How do we know our soil's getting healthier or not? Well, we can start monitoring it. You know, this is some of our clients. With my husband Angus, we spend a lot of time looking at soils, pulling them apart. That was in the 2019 droughts, not looking, you know, pretty dry in that photo. But the things that we look at when we monitor soil are, we do a visual soil assessment where we look at the soil structure. What's the porosity, you know, the air spaces in the soil looking like? Is there any mottling which indicates waterlogged conditions? What sort of compaction do we have? How deep are the plant roots going? What soil organisms are present? What can we see? Are there any earthworms? And we often do a slaking test, which shows you really graphically how your soil holds up when it gets wet. Does it just fall apart and effectively melt when it hits water? Or does it, when it gets wet, does it hold its integrity and shape? Because when a soil is healthy and full of biological health and carbon, when it gets wet, it stays intact, and it just, yeah, it can manage that water. It absorbs it like a sponge. Some soils, however, the minute they get wet, they just collapse and fall apart. And you can see what's going to happen really closely when it's raining. Without going out in the rain, these are going to give you an indication of how your soil's going to manage that water, I guess. So it's really key tools is just start to go, how healthy is my soil? And then how, what are we looking at as in terms of water infiltration? That's the two key issues. We actually do our water infiltration tests as part of our visual soil assessments. And I would say I inspire you to go out and do some soil monitoring. Do the water infiltration test first in case it's a bit slow, because it can take a while and you could be doing other things and looking and digging holes and learning about your soil while you wait for that water if it is a bit slow. And if it's quick, well, that's great. And it can vary at times even in the same site. So over time, what you're looking for is that trend over time. You go out and monitor water infiltration once. Oh, yeah, that's fairly interesting. But the key is to do it over time so you can see the trends, okay? Always way more valuable. And again, to sum up, we're going to, you can go and look at what water infiltration rates are like in your landscape. You can start to monitor your soil physical health. You can start to look at profitability and gross margins per millimetre or 100 millimetres of rain. And you can start to take a note of your well-being, because I tell you, when your profit improves and your soil health improves, your well-being does too. And it's what it's all about, really, isn't it? Is enjoying what we do and knowing we're doing the best we can with what we've got. So I guess on that note, I'll open up to some questions. I've actually stayed to time, which is great. I often really struggle with that.
That's brilliant. Kim, thank you so much. It was perfect timing.
I know. It rarely happens that way. Whiz, that's awesome.
I feel a bit sorry for you as the presenter, because like, you're just looking at your presentation and a few dots on the screen, whereas at least we're looking at you.
I know you kind of miss that interaction.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can do that now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So look, some really amazing take-home messages from that presentation, and your enthusiasm and knowledge is absolutely inspiring and infectious. And really speaking a lot to the topics that we've been talking about here in the ACT with our grazing group. So it's really lovely to sort of see it come from another person and reinforcing our philosophies and ideas. And they're not new. There's a lot of people doing them, and a lot of very like Christine Jones and various other people as well. So I mean, I think for me it was that 1% carbon can hold up to 144,000 litres per hectare. I mean, that's just amazing. And so if we can get people to take that message home and work on those sorts of principles on how to improve that carbon and infiltration, like we're getting somewhere closer to being a little bit more resilient, when these really good times change. But I guess if anyone wanted to ask him a question, feel free just to turn your camera back on and your microphone and jump in, or put your hand up and ask a question, whatever you like. We've had a couple come through the chat box. I can't see them over there.
How to recognise compaction and how to remediate.
So yeah, how to recognise compaction and how to remediate.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, dig a hole, have a look. You don't need to buy an expensive penetrometer to recognise compaction. It's really just digging a hole. I love to just take the spade out and dig a cube of soil out of the ground and then look at it. And you can see, sometimes you can see that photo I had was very graphic with those layers. Sometimes there's a bit of surface crusting, but you'll see the compaction layers, particularly when there's a bit of clay in your soil. It's really, really obvious. In lighter soils, just dig a hole and observe, and you'll start to see what's happening. Number one soil monitoring tool is digging a hole, taking the shovel out and actually looking and starting to just build a relationship with what's happening under the soil surface. When you do your water infiltration tests, that also can indicate compaction as well. I like to, when I've done the water infiltration, I'll pull the tube up and actually start to look at what's going on. Some of those cracking clay soils, the water might have shot down a crack and made it look really good. And other times, so I like to also look and learn and just start to notice. But yeah, just dig a hole. And you can feel when your soil health improves, you start to feel it different walking. So make sure you walk your landscapes. Don't constantly be driving over them, because I reckon that's the number one way to also pick it up when it's softer underfoot. And I've had clients say to me, oh, Kim, you have to come out with your gadget because I'm sure it's softer, and they want to measure it, But yeah, you will notice, you feel it when you walk across the soil. So go for walks more regularly as well and dig more holes and just start to take notice. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, there was a bit of feedback there. Another question is, so if you've got compaction, what mechanical methods could you use? Like an aerator down to 150 millimeters or something?
You can aerate, you can rip, but if you don't address the cause of the compaction, you'll be doing it again. So those tools, if you're also addressing the cause, are great. But I also say, like, sometimes they help you get there quicker, but also address the cause of the compaction. Is the cause low organic matter? Is the cause our grazing management? Is the cause mineral? Sometimes high magnesium soils can get really hard and set, and high sodium as well. So if there's something we can remediate minerally or not, but again, if you're in a grazing system, your grazing management will shift this. It won't happen overnight, but you commit to this for, I always say 7 or 8 years with grazing, 5 maybe if it's raining, you'll start to see things shifting. So it doesn't happen immediately, but it will happen. And it's more compaction's more overall management. Also, thinking about getting plants to let them, if you graze them well, their root systems can go deeper and also help open up that soil. So there's so many ways. It really depends on the cause of compaction on the site. Mechanical can help speed it up, but if you don't address the cause of that, you'll be straight back there again. So really, if you want to get away from it permanently, start to learn about what makes your soil healthy and start to experiment on your context to see what the levers are to get away from having to do it more than once. Yeah.
Alrighty, that's good. And a question about slaking, if you want to sort of just summarize that one, and how do we decrease evaporation?
Yeah, so what is slaking? I guess the slaking test, I pulled that picture out because I was trying to keep to time, but when you if you were to Google slaking test, you'll see lots of ways to do it. I generally, when I'm digging a hole and monitoring soil, take a clod of soil and I will gently place it in some water. Don't ever use bore water. I use rainwater, but ideally probably distilled water to be scientifically correct. Pop that in there and leave it for 10 minutes and watch and observe what happens to that soil. Sometimes a soil will just melt. It'll hit the water, it'll just fall apart. And the slaking is what happens to the stability of that aggregate of soil. Does it collapse or does it stay in its original shape? Healthy soils will keep their shape and absorb the water. Also, we look at dispersion. So is the water getting cloudy and dirty from that's dispersion, or is it clean? And it tells you a lot about the biological and physical health of your soil. And it's a really simple thing to do. That gives you a lot of insights. When I've got people stressing about soil, we do that. We can really see what we're doing quickly when we look at that over time as well. Yeah.
And like the slate test and the water infiltration and your rough ground cover, they're quite easy monitoring tools that anyone can do. It's just a matter of sort of deciding, okay, spring I'm going to do them and get out and do them. And yeah, it's they're not a lot, but they're very powerful as well. Yeah. Another question is wondering what you think would be optimal paddock tree canopy cover over a hectare of improved pastures rather than windbreaks, more like woodlands across paddocks. So e.g. 20% canopy cover.
I guess it depends on your context and your slope and all sorts of things, but I'd be aiming for 20 or 30, and I like the sound of it because that's that, more natural environment, isn't it? Which is going to have more protection over the whole area rather than open grasslands and then lines of trees. But yeah, I think just keep you'll know, I don't like to limit people either, but yeah, I'd aim for 20 as a starting point and then look and observe and go, oh, do we keep going? What else can we achieve, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Do you find perennial plant succession happens as water infiltration improves?
Oh, yeah, it does, because as the water infiltration is improving, the soil biological health's improving too. And soil biology, you think about it, if we want to improve soil biology, they've got to have air and water. They can't live in a dry, completely concrete soil. So as that improves, their home improves and their populations get healthier. And that's also part of the trigger for plant succession, is that, you know, soil health and what's happening underneath the soil. So definitely it all goes together, and it's hard to pull one bit out without looking at all of it, isn't it? You know, but definitely, yeah.
So yeah, keep your questions coming through if you've got any more. I've just got one here. What is the best place to start improving rainfall efficiency if you're starting to just sort of think about it now?
No, it's really simple, and you might guess it from what I've already been talking about today. But I think the place to start is learn about soil health. What makes your soil healthy? Because it doesn't come from a product or input. It actually comes from our management. And it's learning about what soil health is then helps us understand what we need to do in our context. And it's starts with restoring soil carbon, because it's the basis of health, biological health, physical health, and mineral health. So it benefits everything. But how we do that is we understand how we are capturing solar energy to restore soil carbon, because soil carbon can only be restored through photosynthesis. So it's then we start to go, well, how do we use the free rainfall? We also got to look at how we use the free solar energy that's coming into our system every day. Have we got plants that can capture sunlight and photosynthesize and help build back healthy soils? And how we manage those plants and photosynthesis is actually driving rainfall use efficiency. So it all comes back to another free resource of solar energy capture. And how do we, you know, that's probably where we need to start to look and go, how are we managing the sunlight and are we capturing it? Do we have a diversity of plants growing at different times of the year to do that for us as well? Yeah, we're all connected, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
And I actually have this really cute image in my head, actually, of, you know, pastures and grasses and this insulation on your soils, like a big doona, and the little critters underneath there just snuggling up in these colder temperatures. So I love that one.
Amazing story about that. If I've got 2 seconds to share, when we were burnt out in 2019, the really hot part of our fire affected our worm farms, and we had 2 big bathtub worm farms. And when you think about soil health and humus and all the rest of it, worms are part of that. Well, they were in the hottest part of the fire, and we didn't want to look under the lid of these worm farms. But eventually, after a few days, we better have to look and see what's happened. They were fine, because of the insulative effect of the worm castings and the fact we'd looked after the worm farm and it was moist enough. They were probably in 1,000-degree fire. The linings had burnt, everything around them had burnt, but they tunneled into that vermicast and survived. And I went, well, if you've got that in your soil, that's the insulation that we want from, you know, that biological health. So it was really graphic and really made me more passionate about earthworms because they're also part of water use efficiency on the big picture. They're all connected, aren't they? Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Wow.
So probably one more question, or if anyone wants to send anything through, but so it sounds like ACT, our soils are a bit similar to your soils in northern New South Wales. So what sort of improvement in soil carbon have you seen in your area?
Yeah, well, I can talk from my experiences here. So where we are is very similar to you, but you don't have to go far to have black cracking clay. So, but I live on a really granite soil, CEC about 5 to 6, and we saw soil carbon double. Yeah. And we need to do another soil test. We don't test a lot, but it had doubled just through rotational grazing. So it is very possible, that we can shift it. If you think about that, look at the extra water we're holding, and it was in that photo. It could get in, and we could store it, and we can grow more feed. So, it's really, it is possible, and you know, it's just committing and being a bit patient. You can't just throw it out the bag. fix it, but we can change our management practices. And in our own context, like, we have to really think about our own context, because, you know, we've all got different contexts that we're working with, you know, and getting to understand soil health in general, but then how does that apply where I am? It's not that it won't apply where I am, it's how does this apply where I am? And that's, I think that question and that reframe helps us access what we need to do next, you know? Yeah.
Well, that's brilliant. I don't think there's any more questions coming through. We might just wrap it up if you're happy and if everyone else is happy with that as well. So Mary has just put up a survey link in the chat box. If you were able to jump on and complete that survey at the end, we would really appreciate it. We'll also send it out as an email if you can't access it through the chat box there. But just really wanted to say thank you, Kim. It was a really fantastic presentation. And like I said, your knowledge and enthusiasm is very infectious. And, you know, like what you're doing in your area is fantastic, but you also do, you know, travel across the width and the breadth of Australia to do a lot of work. So we're very lucky for that. And, you know, like without the funding from the Future Drought Fund, Farm Business Resilience, the Australian government, none of these sorts of webinars or training workshops that we do would be possible. So, of course, you know, thank them very much for it. Thank you to all the participants for your time online. We hope you have enjoyed it. We'll send you out the survey. We'll send you out the link to the presentation recording. And again, even outside of this, if you've got our details and if you've got some topics for future webinars, send them through, please. We want to know. I can always get guest speakers in that I'm interested in, but it's not all about me. So, yeah, just a huge thanks to everyone. I think I've mentioned everyone and got everyone, and
thanks for the opportunity to share. It's been great. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Right, well, it's probably time to put your cup of tea down and go back outside and do some work now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. That was great.